Hey there, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter Emily King. At the age of 16, Emily decided she wanted to dedicate herself to music. In some ways, she was picking up the family business. Her mother and father were working musicians, and Emily and her brother grew up watching them play. By 19, she was signed to J Records, which was founded by the legendary Clive Davis. She was nominated for a Grammy for her debut album, East Side Story, but found the major label experience soul-destroying and was dropped several years later. Bowed but not broken, Emily set about finding her true voice and rebuilding her career, and she's since released 3 more albums and earned another 2 Grammy nominations, the latest being for her 2020 single, See Me. In this interview, we talk about the rollercoaster ride of Emily's career and what she's learned along the way, as well as her upbringing in New York, her memories of recording with Nas on the album Street's Disciple, what it was like auditioning for Clive Davis, and much, much more. I caught up with Emily a week or so after this year's Grammys. I was in Sydney and she was in the Upper West Side New York apartment she moved to just over a year ago, having spent the first few months of lockdown with her mother in the Soho apartment she grew up in. With COVID preventing her from attending the Grammy ceremony, she watched it unfold on TV from the Upper West Side, and we started by talking about that experience.
My best friend Sherman came over and we ate sushi and ice cream. And, I stood in front of a Zoom screen like what we're doing now. And I didn't win, but it was really exciting because my category was broadcast on television, which I'd never had that experience before. So that was fun.
Right, and that's the best R&B performance category for See Me.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
that song itself is a very powerful song and a very special song. And from what I understand, it was inspired by or a response to what you were seeing in the Black Lives Matter movement. Was there a particular moment throughout that movement that you felt moved to write that song?
Oh my gosh. Yes. It was just such a powerful moment in time just to be in New York. I was staying with my mother down in Soho. And so basically the city went from absolutely quiet streets to protests and riots. I mean, I saw my first looting. I'd never seen that up front, face to face. I remember Mom and I were just standing outside, and on Houston Street, we heard a roar of crash, crash, crash. And all of the windows on Houston Street, which is this long street that goes from east to west, west to east, all of the windows in every store were being broken by this crowd,
Wow.
And it was such an electricity in the air. And it was, of course, triggered by this total injustice and the whole history of this country and everything just boiling up. And for some reason, finally, there was attention being put on this injustice. And it felt, it was heartbreaking, but it was also like, it felt like some sort of change might happen too, And I've never seen the city like that in my whole life. I grew up here. There was like a week where everybody's attention was on this subject, and my label, they hit me up and they said, we want to put out music to support Black Lives Matter. I was like, hell yeah, I want to do it too. Let me look and see if I got something. I looked through my whole catalog. I couldn't find not one song. I think I deliberately stay away from sort of preachy material because that's not something I gravitate towards as an older person who doesn't know jack shit about anything. When I was young and I thought I knew everything, I was preaching left and right. And then you know how that is, and
I do.
You grow up and you're like, that was so cringy. I thought, what was I thinking?
I knew everything.
So I knew everything, and I had no experience, and that's why I was so happy. So I was a bit like shocked that I really wanted to contribute something, and I was so moved by all of these horrible, tragic things that were happening. So I moved up here into this apartment The morning after, my mom and I stood and watched that riot, that protest. I moved here. I felt almost a survivor's guilt because like ain't nothing was going on up here.
Right.
This was like quiet street, older people. Like you almost could just like nothing was going on in the world up here.
Wow.
But in a sense, it gave me this quiet to reflect on what had just happened and what was happening. And so I started writing this song, and it was just 2 chords, and it just got stuck in my head. For a couple of days, the melody would not leave. I almost got sick because it was so much in my head. And it brought me to tears. And I said, okay, let me just record this. It was the fastest song I'd ever written and recorded in my whole life. And just gave it to the label, and they accepted it, and that was it. That was long story endless. I mean, yes is the answer to your question. I was very moved. We've always had an awareness of police brutality and social injustices, and that this country was born and raised on that shit, But to see everybody else in the world, here's the other side of it. This song was really... It was born of the sadness that came out of going on the internet and seeing people that didn't believe it was real,
Right.
that refuse to acknowledge someone else's pain, by the sheer fact that they've never walked in their shoes, but for some reason they thought they could judge that life of a person. And so that's where it came from. Can you now? What more will it take for you to just say, yes, this shit is fucked up. Let's try.
Yeah.
Let's try this together to move on.
Yeah. And you've mentioned Soho, where you were with your mum and lockdown for earlier in this month and around the time of those riots. But I understand that you actually spent like 30 odd years in that sort of same part of New York. Is that you grew up there and that was your home base for that period of time? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in that apartment. She still lives there.
Okay.
My brother and I, my father and my mother, and my grandmother was there for a period of time, and a dog in this, 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
And it was
1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah, 1 bedroom.
With all of you.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? That scene where the family's like all laying in the floor. That was us, It's like it was a lot of togetherness and a lot of fighting and a lot of basically there was no door to close, so we had to face each other and work it out fast.
Wow.
Which I'm grateful for now, because that's how I like to work through life, is like, let's talk it out and get to the next. Let's not hold it in.
I saw an interesting quote from you where you were saying that no sunlight came into the house and that there was a lot of training your mind not to go into the darkness. What did you mean by that?
Well, the apartment is surrounded by buildings, and in order to accommodate the living situation, my father built this like loft, so he could cut the room in half, and so my parents slept on the top and we slept below. And so that, whatever light was coming through that one back window was really sort of curtained by this loft. And it really is, to this day. I mean, when I was quarantined with Mom, you don't wake up to the sun. You wake up to these fluorescent lights that my father put in because they're plant lights, right?
Right.
And his theory was that if it helps the plants grow, then maybe we'll also be positively affected somehow. But it's like you flip them on and it's like buzz, like there's this buzz, oh God. But that's how you have to have those bright lights in that apartment, because that's the only way to know, okay, it's daytime now. And so, I mean, it's easy to get depressed in that type of place, especially not being able to go outside and pandemic and all this stuff like that. So I do feel like I've learned a lot from that. not to say I can just sit in a dark room and be happy, because that's not where it's at for me. I know now that I love sunshine.
Yeah.
And I really thrive in the sunshine.
Right. But was music important to you in terms of taking your mind out of that darkness?
Yes, absolutely. I think I didn't even realize how important that was just for my whole family, because my parents, they were working musicians and they
Mm.
sang together and raised us that way. And so when we were in that apartment together, up until I was about 10, that's when they split up. But my mother stayed in that apartment and I grew up there. But when we were there together, they were rehearsing. There was always music playing. My mother was practicing the piano, and that gives you relief. Absolutely
Right.
gives you relief when you can't find it elsewhere. And it's a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
So,
And you mentioned
yeah.
your parents were jobbing musicians and jazz singers, from what I understand, Marion Cowings and Kim Gillespie. Did you go and see them perform? Was that part of your upbringing to actually go and watch them play in clubs?
Yes, that's what my childhood. My brother AC Lincoln, who's also a songwriter and singer and producer. Shout out to Al AC. Um, we grew up going to the Blue Note and traveling. Our childhood vacations were gigs, and that was really. I'm just so grateful that we had that chance to leave town and like see other parts of the world, and that was music that gave us those opportunities to do that. Otherwise, because we didn't have any money, so my parents, they would do like gigs at. Do you remember Club Med? It was like
Yeah.
the Club Meds, right? Oh my
Are they not
god! I
around
don't think
anymore?
it's around anymore. I have to Google it because that was like my brother and I. That was the happy time for
Right.
us because we were just kids. We didn't have to do anything but eat French fries on the beach, And basically, it's a resort, Club Med,
Yeah.
so it was like happy time. And back then, my parents would hire a full band, like a big band. They had the budget, and they would bring all these musicians over to Club Med on these beautiful islands, Martinique, St.
Oh,
Lucia,
wow.
St. Martin, all these places. And we would all just get a free vacation, and it was a lifesaver because there was that sunshine that we never had. Just
That's
boom.
it. Yeah.
That's it. Once I realized, like, oh, music? You mean you can be broke and live like you're rich? All you have to do is sing? That was a revelation.
Well, I've seen you say that when you started singing, you didn't really have a talent for it, which is so hard to believe given what a beautiful singer you are. But it wasn't a natural
Oh.
talent for you.
Yeah, I certainly didn't feel that way. It was a lot of like push and pull and trying to figure out what I was good at. And you have like virtuosos
Mm.
at a young age, and that was not me. I
Mhm.
mean, I always like understood the language just being around it, but I didn't really apply it until I would sing at like talent shows and stuff, but when I started playing guitar when I was like 14, 15,
Mhm.
then I realized, oh, well, if you don't like this song because it doesn't suit your voice, well, maybe you could just write a melody yourself to accommodate that range or whatever you know.
Sure.
And so that was a huge, wonderful discovery for me, was that I enjoyed making up melodies and chords and trying to write songs and stuff
Yeah.
to find my own voice,
I mean, if you had that revelation around the age of 14 or 15, it's quite a quick transition then, because you left school at 16 and got your GED, but to pursue music. So that's a pretty quick transition to go from just picking up a guitar and learning it and having that revelation to I'm going to leave school and do this for a living. But you were just set on that course.
Wow, right. Yeah, it sure felt like the longest time. When you're that age, when you're in school
Yeah.
and the hours are just melting and you're like, this is taking forever. I mean, even elementary school was hard. Just when is this over?
Right.
I'm ready to. And finally, I finally realized, because you toy with other thoughts about what you might become, and I thought, oh, maybe I liked basketball and I liked animals, but I didn't like homework, and I wasn't really wasn't very good wasn't very good at that. And so I told my parents, I said, look, I want to leave high school and I'll get my GED. They wanted me to get something. So I went to a summer program. I had this wonderful instructor in the Bronx. And a couple weeks later, I got it in the mail. And that was a real freeing experience, but also like, should have done that sooner. And then I just started doing gigs. Yeah.
And I think your mum actually got you your first gig, if I understand it, the Bitter End in New York
Yes. Oh my God. Rod, you did your
when you were 16.
snooping. You snooped around.
What do you remember of that night, though?
I remember a room full of neighbors. All the neighbors came. Everyone was so sweet and supportive, and I wore like what did I had like a pair of Converse, like Chuck Taylors, and I felt cool. I felt like, nah, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna do it. And then I realized, well, the neighbors, they're not going to be at every show, so you have to kind of like be good at this.
Did you have a drive? Were you determined that this was going to be your career?
I did. I had a drive, and I had a naivete that served me well, and I wanted to be the biggest star, and I wanted to sign to Clive Davis. That's what I wanted to do. Sign to Clive Davis. I made a demo in my mother's kitchen because she had some equipment, this like huge computer. This was like 2000, maybe 1999.
Mm.
And then again, mom hooked it up because she was friends with someone who worked at ASCAP, Bill Brown. And he shopped my little demo around to different producers. And I ended up meeting with Chucky Thompson, who did Mary J. Blige's My Life album and Biggie and all this like 90s hip hop and R&B that I grew up listening to as a city kid. And I was so enthralled and like starstruck by Chucky.
Yeah.
And he was also and is the nicest guy in the world. And so he became my mentor, and we worked together for like 3 or 4 years throughout that whole process of trying to find songs, produce songs, and then shop them to labels and then get signed and then be developed, within the label. So
yeah. What did you learn from Chucky?
Chucky is such a natural musician. I mean, he's self-taught. He can play anything. I learned so much about producing and patience and how to build a song and how to, stay up until 4 a.m. when it's just painful and I'm like, get me out of here. He would fall asleep playing an instrument. And, and then I would look at the engineer and I'd be like, all right, that's it, right? And the engineer was like, no, watch, he's about to wake up. And he would wake up and continue. And I was like, oh, I just want to go home. I learned a lot about a lot of things from Chucky. He was very much, an important person in my life. And I went down to D.C., to the D.C., Maryland area where he's from. And I stayed with him and his family and my manager at the time, Carla Truitt. And, we would just get up and make pancakes and go to the studio. And then we would drive up to the city, have a meeting, and they'd be like, that's great, come back with more. And then we go back and then come and try to do. And so that felt like forever. That felt like it would last forever. And then finally, we had a few meetings with Peter Edge, who was an A&R at J Records, head of A&R at J Records, which was Clive Davis's company back then. And Peter, he believed in me, and I'm so grateful. And he got me a meeting with Clive, and I went in one day and I sang, with my acoustic guitar for Clive Davis in a room with like some A&Rs, and I thought I was the shit. I mean, I was like totally stupid in that kind of good way, which you need back then. But that worked. I got signed.
Yeah, but just
Yeah.
to go back to
Yeah.
that audition, I
Yeah.
can't imagine how intimidating that is at any age, let alone as a teenager, to walk into a room and to have to perform to Clive, not only to Clive Davis, but to other people in a really presumably quite sterile environment, making things just that little bit harder.
Right.
What happened? Talk me through walking into that room and talking to Clive and playing.
I remember I remember feeling like I'm gonna change things. I'm gonna be myself, and I'm what they've been waiting for. And I went to there used to be this outdoor market on Broadway between West Third and West Fourth, and there's a guy there that would draw on hats like trucker hats, and I bought this Jimi Hendrix illustrated hat. It
Yeah.
was right on the front, and I was like, "That's so cool." I was like, love Jimi Hendrix, and he represented rebellion to me. And I wore some like jeans with hole in them, had a little hole in them, and I just felt, like how you feel when you're that young and you're gonna face a room full of grown-ups who
Mm.
they forgot what it's like to be Peter Pan,
Mhm.
and I am Peter Pan. I'm here to show you what the magic is. So I had that like naive sort of confidence back then. And I was nervous, of course, and I'm sure I had the shaky throat, which happens when
Yeah.
I'm nervous,
Yeah.
but it was crazy because I walked into that room and I saw the neighbor who lived in my building where I grew up in, who we would walk our dogs to get like
Yeah.
around the same time. I would see him all the time, and I looked at him. I said, "Brandon, what are you doing here?" He said, "I work here. I work at the label." I was like, "Did you? That's crazy. This better go well because I gotta go home to. We're going home together." That was really crazy. But he went on to become this amazing music manager,
Okay.
Brandon Creed. That was a funny coincidence.
Yeah.
It was all downhill from there. All downhill.
Right. Well, you said that you had that attitude that you're what they've been looking for. You walked into that room and you were going to be true to yourself. But that, by the sounds of things, that's not what that experience turned out to be. Once you actually signed with the label, there was a period of being put in the room with other writers, and I guess being put in the room with people who talk about your image and try and shape you in certain ways. Was that your experience? And what did you take away from that?
It was. I think, having Chucky as my mentor he provided like this sort of safety net. But at the end of the day, I didn't know that I was supposed to lead them.
Mm.
I did in that meeting, but it got chipped away at a little bit by bit. I said, well, let me try it their way.
Mhm.
One too many times. One time is too many times,
Right.
which I know now as a grown up person, but I wanted so desperately to be famous and and all this stuff. And so, I had this what it's like you have the devil and the angel, like one's on one shoulder and one's on the other. And the angel was like, don't sing that lyric. You would never sing that. That's not your words. Don't say it. And the devil's like, just do it one time and you're gonna be a famous singer. Oh God.
After the break, Emily talks about rebuilding her career and the lessons she learned from her major label experience. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Emily King. Before the break, Emily was talking about signing with J Records at the age of 19 and how her excitement soon turned to disillusionment as outside voices and influences tried to change her and her music. We pick up the conversation with Emily reflecting on the whole experience.
I thought I would never recover. I mean, at the end of 3 years, and I blame no one but myself. I mean, people needed me to be a leader, and I didn't know what I was doing.
You're young.
I was young, and so by the end of it, I had put out this record that I really, really worked so hard on.
East Side Story?
East Side Story, yeah. And there are a couple of songs that I really love, but there's some ones on there that I mean, I don't listen to, you know?
Mm.
And it got nominated for a Grammy, which was a huge deal for me at the time. But at the end of the day, I wasn't proud of what I had done.
Right.
And that was like I felt like physically ill.
Really? So it was tainted. You just couldn't enjoy that nomination. It was like a hollow kind of feeling, I imagine.
Well, yes. I mean, I grew up in this music first, jazz, snobby, like and just around really this beautiful musicianship and all this stuff. So I knew when I was dumbing it down,
Mm.
and I just felt like I lost myself, and that's like the one thing I'm grateful to have had that experience, because now I know what it feels like
Mm.
to have the wrong intentions. Your intention is, if you're an artist, your intention should be to scratch your own itch and do what is right for you. If you love something so much, you have a better chance of connecting with someone else because it is genuinely something you love.
Mm.
But I was risking it all on stuff I didn't even like. Just
Mm.
like risk it all. Might as well be on something that you really care about, that feels good for you. So when I got dropped from the label, I met my producer, who ended up producing and collaborating on music with me for the next 10 years. And he told me, we can work together, but don't ever put out anything that you don't genuinely love ever
Mm.
again.
Which is such a big lesson to learn.
Yeah, it is, because what else do we have at the
Yeah.
end of the day?
Is that J Most? Is that the producer?
Yes,
Yes.
Jeremy Most. Yes.
Jeremy Most. So
Yes.
on the one hand, being dropped creatively is a blessing, but there must have been part of you as well that was so disillusioned and disappointed that's what that experience had been.
Yes, a lot, very much so. I mean, I had adults saying, "Well, you had one chance." People that I work
That's
with
it.
saying, "Yeah, you had one chance, and this is the biggest opportunity, and it'll never come again." Like that stuff. So I don't know if they were saying that to themselves, and then I just happened to be in the room, and they were, I think it all comes from a fear, because you want something to be successful, so you're trying to encourage people, but it's almost like more of a fear mongering, and it's not real. It's not reality. Thankfully, the internet was born right around that time. I mean, it really took off right when I became an independent artist. MySpace was bubbling up, and it went from the label and the managers being your communication to the world to you being your communication to the world.
Yeah.
And that was such a blessing and changed everything.
Yeah. So when you think about becoming an independent musician and using MySpace, was that immediate? Were you dropped, and did your resolve just go through the roof? I'm going to prove them wrong. Or was there a period where you just did consider that I'm going to have to step away?
Well, I was heartbroken. I mean, I was so low, and I also was so relieved that I didn't have to ask for anyone's opinion anymore,
Mm.
because that was so exhausting for me to try to, have somebody say, "Okay, let's make it sound more like Lauryn Hill.
Mm.
Let's make
Yeah.
it sound more like D'Angelo. Go in and write a song like Corinne Bailey Rae, okay?"
Right.
And you're just like, "What? What is happening?" So I was grateful to not have that anymore.
Yeah.
Then on the flip side, I started recording from home, and I didn't have the budget, I didn't have any money, and also I was learning how to critique myself, because I was my engineer,
Mm.
and I was recording like in the apartment and stuff, and just going crazy with takes, take after take after take, and trying to figure out how to judge and critique my performance in an honest way, in a productive way. So that was a learning process. But meeting Jeremy overlapped between having the label and not having the label because I met Jeremy on a gig. He was recommended to me by my guitar player at the time who couldn't make a gig, and he said, "You got to try this guy. He's the best." And so I had hired Jeremy for a show, and we became friends. And I discovered he had music that was circulating amongst musicians in New York City at the time, and we were all fans of his music.
Hmm.
And so I had this sort of person that helped me out of that situation and helped me to learn and grow. So feel very fortunate.
And understand that you're also playing restaurants at the time, and there was a gig in Boston that you played, and you walked out at the end of it, and I think there were 3 or 4 people waiting for you, and they were fans of yours. They'd found your music on MySpace, and that was a really moving moment for you. The fact that these people had connected with this music, and from what I understand, that actually helped push you to keep going with this. Was that encounter important to you?
Oh, yes. Oh my God. That was so surprising because I mean, I had some fans from the East Side Story days. But there was no telling who was listening to the music at the time because you just didn't have like the friend count that you have now
Hmm.
on Instagram and all this stuff. So I didn't know if anybody was out there listening and stuff. And I had just Jeremy and I had put out some songs on MySpace and SoundCloud.
Uh-huh.
And it was just these demos. And it was the first music I had made that I really liked. And I went up to Boston to play at a restaurant. I went on the mega bus. I went by myself. You know, I just need to get out of the city. And the gig was kind of terrible. But when I left, these kids were out there. And it moved me to tears because I was just like totally surprised. I mean, I had no idea who was listening, they told me that Berkeley kids were listening to my stuff, and I was totally shocked. You know,
Right.
it was like what's that movie that documentary where he's a 70s songwriter and he goes over to Australia and he
Oh, Searching for Sugar Man.
yeah, right. I felt like him. I was like, what? There's a world? There's a world for me. I was totally shocked. And yeah, they encouraged the heck out of me. And that was awesome. So there's like these moments that mean so much, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you make the 7 EP, which I guess is your follow-up to East Side Story, but it's your first kind of stab at you being you. What did you want your music to be that it wasn't on East Side Story?
I wanted it to be something I enjoyed listening to. I wanted it to be like these just beautiful. I always want to just create like a beauty something that, you know, on East Side Story, I was just still trying to figure out my voice and I was singing. I was very much mimicking singers that I love and respect and grew up listening to. And I think that's part of the process. But by the time I got to the 7 EP, I was like, okay, I'm gonna like lean into this soft voice that I have and these kind of like I don't have to be a belty singer. You know, I can just be soft and gentle, but also let me figure out how I can be dynamic in that way.
And you recorded it, if I'm right in thinking, in the closet in your grandmother's house. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. Oh my God.
That's a big shift from presumably the studio you recorded East Side Story in.
It was. I was such a spoiled brat during those times. Like when East Side Story, you know, I mean, it was like the beautiful studios and really great engineers and a lot of takeout. You know, I spent hours just eating takeout, just not appreciating it, like sleeping, wanting to go home. And then here I was in Nani's closet with a couple of roaches came in, and I'm like, damn. No, hide the takeout from the roaches.
But you kept going. That's the thing which I think is so interesting, is that you kept going.
No other option. Just couldn't. But you know what? I have the most encouraging family. My parents and my brother and my grandma. I mean, and Jeremy,
Mm.
so it was really like I probably would have given up, to be honest, but everybody is so loving and like, go, you can do it. So
Okay.
yeah.
And then you make the switch in 2015 and Scenery in 2019. And Scenery is interesting in that for the first time, I think you actually moved out of New York and you went up to the Catskills to record that record. And I was wondering if there's a parallel there between being dropped from your major label and then finding who you are and being who you are on the 7 EP, and then also leaving New York to the Catskills to, I guess, again, find yourself and who you want to be. Did they have similar effects on your creativity?
Mm, I think so. I think so. It's like most of my sort of motivation is drawn by what I know what I don't want.
Mm,
It's not always like most of the time it's not knowing exactly what I want. It's knowing what I don't want. I knew I could not be in the city anymore for some reason. I had to get out. I mean, the city was at its peak ambition moment, a couple years before the pandemic. Everybody's buzzing and trying to make it and all this stuff, and I was like, I just need nature. I needed
right.
nature. So I went upstate and rented a house and bought a car, or yeah, I bought a car. It was used. And I had to learn how to drive.
Yeah.
And I said, let's make this record up here. And and we don't have to deal with the neighbors. We don't have to have the city. You just feel the buzz of the city.
Yeah.
Like you'll be in your apartment on Friday night and you're like, damn, I should be outside. I should be out at the party. But when you're in the country, you don't have these influences. So
Yeah.
it was nice. It was a whole other way of living that I had never experienced before on my own, and I loved it. I still love the country life. It's probably just a grass is always greener situation. So it changes.
What inspired you to record Sides, the album from 2020, which was acoustic renditions of songs from your catalog? What inspired that?
Um, that was, I think, inspired by touring the songs. Jeremy and I had toured these fully produced songs in smaller settings where we would reconfigure the arrangements of the songs. We would speed things up. We would strip things down, depending on what the tour situation was. Sometimes if we were on tour with someone else, we would size down. And we ended up really liking these arrangements and wanted to represent them on a record. And so we decided to, instead of like having to write all new material, we were like, let's record our live acoustic versions of these songs.
Hmm.
And it was also an opportunity to have some live strings, which we had never ever had live strings before.
Mm.
And so that was a real joy. That was something that I had not experienced before.
And has that inspired songs like so? First Time came out in March, early March, which is a such again beautiful acoustic and intimate song, and See Me as well, acoustic and very intimate. Has Sides been a bit of a watershed in terms of pushing you in that direction for your new music?
I suppose it has. I think I always loved, hearing a voice and a guitar or a voice and a piano. And I always would fall in love with my demos, as we tend to do. Um, but then I would fall more in love with the produced versions that Jeremy would come up with. But I always still love listening to the stripped down stuff. So I think it's a matter of allowing that to be okay. Just
Mm.
it's okay to just be naked in a sense and vulnerable. And First Time was really the first record I've ever done in that way, cuz even See Me, Jeremy so beautifully put down this piano on there,
Hmm.
and First Time is just me. And so that was like, I mean, I called my manager the week before and was like, we have to put a stop to this. This is not good. Like, what was I thinking? Nobody ever told. Like, why didn't you tell me not to do? And I actually have this post-it still on my wall because he's the best, and he gave me this amazing pep talk. And one of the things he said was, Emily, you had the notion to create this song and to put it out, and he said that's spirit driving, not strategy. And so I wrote that down. That's spirit, not strategy. And
Nice.
I thought, wow, that's a really nice. That is the total opposite of my early learning from the music business,
Mm.
And I just really appreciated him saying that, because I'm learning. I still have a long ways to go, but I really want to trust myself more. And I guess that was a kind of first time.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
And speaking of learning from your manager, I understand that another artist that you've learned quite a lot from and are very close to is Sarah Bareilles. How have you learned from Sarah?
Oh, let me count the ways. So many things. So we met maybe 6 years ago now. I went on her tour with her, and she came out before our show and introduced us as the opening act. I had never seen anything like that in my whole
Yeah.
life. The generosity of spirit, I mean, her kindness, her sort of like fuck it attitude, like she does what she wants. She talk about spirit driving, not strategy. Like she's spirit first,
Mm.
And that was refreshing and totally new for me. There's still kind of, you never know what you're going to get when you meet someone really successful. Sometimes they have a little bit of a guard up, and that's like learned behavior,
Mm-hmm.
But she never had that. And I wanted to be like that. I'm like, is it okay? Are you sure
Yeah.
are you doing this? Like, is it okay to be that nice? I mean, but we became friends. We became really good friends.
There was one other artist, and this is going back quite a way, I guess, back to the East Side Story days again. But I was wondering if you had any experience with them, and that was Nas, and because you recorded on his Streets Disciple record.
That's wow. Throwback.
Yeah, throwback. That's right. Did you have any experience with Nas, and what did you learn from that whole experience?
Well, what I learned was no, I did not have an experience. What I learned was you don't have to be in the studio with someone to have a record with them. That's one of the things I learned. In fact, they don't even have to be in the studio to have a record. I mean, it was really cool. That was like a huge, exciting moment for me. I mean, that was like street cred, New York,
Sure.
crazy. I was with my producer Chucky, and we all went to the strip club one night. That I do remember. But I didn't talk to Nas.
Okay.
I just sat with Chucky like, can we go home? But it was exciting. It was exciting.
Sure.
Like, wow, this is like the stuff I grew up, I mean, I was in middle school when Nas was like at his height of stardom. And so it wasn't far removed from being on that record. Like, I remember Chucky just saying, like, Nas, he'll find a subject and he'll just learn just enough about it to make a song. That's what I remember him saying. He'll read like 3 pages out of a book, and then he'll be like, all right, 3 minutes, let's go. I don't know how true that is, but I think that's a good tool for songwriting. You just need to know a little bit about a little bit,
Right.
a little bit about something.
And just to finish up, Emily, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you would give credit?
Yeah.
Are there people you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Absolutely not. No, I'm kidding.
I did it all.
Me,
Good night.
myself, and I. Okay. Yes, so many people. Jeremy Most, who has been just the biggest, most inspirational person musically. Ben Kane, who mixed a lot of our records and gave me the encouragement and studio time and friendship to keep me going, and still does. I mean, we did First Time together. Jesse Singer and Chris Soper. They have Like Mind Studios, which is now in LA, but it used to be in Williamsburg. And they would give me time, and Jeremy and I would go there, and, you know, they just helped guide us in so many ways, and are brilliant musicians. My band, Ethan Goldborn, who's a keyboardist and songwriter, he wrote Ever After. He came to me with the hook one day, and it blew my mind. I said, please let me record that song. Brian Cockrum, bass player, Shanae Johnson, Karita, Jack DeBow, Shawan Andrews, James Williams, just so many beautiful musicians. Working with Tom Elmhurst was a dream. I mean, learning about how proper mixing of a record is done, not that high frequency blow through a metal straw shit, which I hate. He's amazing. Bob Ludwig, he mastered scenery. Chris Bowers is an incredible composer out of LA. He does film scores, and he's a buddy of ours, and he played keys on the Sides record. Jess Wolfe from Lucius, she generously lent her amazing vocals to the Sides record. She's singing harmonies on Already There. Dan Molad mixed that record beautifully. My brother AC Lincoln, who is an amazing drummer. He's a tap dancer, but he basically is drumming with his body. It takes a lot of people. I think I mentioned Rob Moose already. And yeah, good thing I didn't win that Grammy, because I would have put everyone to sleep with this long ass speech. So I don't know. It's like everyone. There's so many people. I'm sure they're missing a lot of people, but thank you, everyone.
Look, Emily, thank you so much for your time. It's been so great to chat with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much,
Rod. What an amazing interview. You had all this information.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Emily for her time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to Jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.